How could wooden boats, smaller than a millionaire's yacht, send 6,000 Japanese soldiers to the bottom in a single night? This is the untold story of America's secret weapon that made Japan fear the very darkness they once ruled. The Japanese destroyer's searchlight swept across the black surface of the Solomon Sea, like the finger of death. For a moment, the beam passed so close to our bow, the sea itself seemed to tremble in silver light, yet it missed. We froze. 23 sailors pressed against the deck of PT-164, breath held, hearts pounding, engines cut to idle. Only the hush of waves against plywood separated us from discovery. Behind the destroyer, 3 hulking transports crawled through darkness, carrying nearly 8,000 Japanese soldiers. Their destination, Kolombangara, their mission, to reinforce an island garrison already bleeding American Marines dry. It was July 19th, 1943. In less than 4 minutes, this fragile wooden vessel, smaller than a millionaire's yacht, would decide the fate of thousands. The odds were absurd. The Japanese Navy ruled the night. Its sailors, masters of the Tokyo Express, slipped men and supplies past our heavy cruisers with impunity. Against them, we had thin planks of mahogany, temperamental Packard engines, and torpedoes that sometimes ran wild. Yet tonight, armed with audacity alone, 3 PT boats would attempt the impossible. Every man on board knew the stakes: failure, and Kolombangara would be reinforced, success, and enemy transports would vanish beneath the waves. Thousands of soldiers would never set foot on that island. We were shadows in the water, ghosts hidden in the moon's embrace, waiting for one signal to unleash hell. But how could wooden boats challenge steel monsters? How did America's most unlikely secret weapon force Japan to fear the very darkness they once ruled? To answer that, we must return to the beginning, to the birth of the Mosquito Fleet, to understand why fragile wooden boats could terrify the world's most disciplined navy. We must step back. Back to the summer of 1943. The Pacific War was balanced on a knife's edge. Japan still commanded the night. Their destroyers and transports ran the gauntlet of the Solomon Islands with practiced ease. These runs had a name: the Tokyo Express. To American ears, it was the Rat Run. Either way, the result was the same. Every evening, under cover of darkness, Japanese reinforcements and supplies poured into contested islands. By dawn, they vanished into jungle strongholds, leaving American Marines to face fresh troops and endless ammunition. American admirals had no answer. Our cruisers and destroyers, built for open ocean duels, were clumsy in these narrow channels. Radar gave us eyes in the dark, but not agility. Gunfire duels in confined waters only fed Japanese confidence. At Savo Island, August 1942, 4 Allied cruisers were sunk in a single night. The Imperial Navy walked away without a scratch. The lesson was brutal. At night, the rising sun reigned supreme. The United States needed something different, something unexpected. Not another steel giant to match Japan gun for gun, but a weapon that flipped the rules of naval combat. The answer came from desperation and ingenuity. Across secret boatyards from New Orleans to New York, designers asked a heretical question. What if victory didn't require armor? What if speed, surprise, and audacity could outweigh brute strength? From this gamble, the patrol torpedo boat was born, 80 feet of laminated mahogany, 20 feet wide. 3 Packard 1,500 horsepower engines, the same bloodline as aircraft engines. 4 Mark 13 torpedoes, each weighing as much as a house back home, machine guns, a single 20mm cannon, and the courage of a dozen men packed into its cramped wooden hull. To the admirals steeped in Jutland and Manila Bay, PT boats seemed laughable. Toy craft, unfit for serious war. But others saw something different. Commander James Patterson, Wild Jim to his men, argued that America needed guerrillas of the sea, hit-and-run raiders, assassins armed with torpedoes, boats that would not fight fair, but fight smart. It was a radical break from doctrine. Naval tradition said victory came from lines of battleships exchanging thunder across the horizon. But by 1943, tradition was a death sentence. The Pacific demanded innovation. For Japan, mastery of night fighting had become a pillar of strategy. Generations of sailors trained to fight by moonlight, by instinct, by raw vision. Their confidence in darkness was absolute. They believed radar was a crutch, and that no enemy could rival their skill after sunset. And then, the first whispers began. Reports of American Mosquito Boats, tiny, fast, impossible to track, striking in the night like cobras from black water. The Imperial Navy dismissed these rumors at first. The idea that Americans would send wooden speedboats against steel destroyers seemed absurd. Yet by the summer of 1943, that absurdity was already preparing to tear holes in Japan's armor of confidence. This was the world into which PT boats emerged. A world where tradition ruled doctrine, and where three fragile boats were about to prove that even empires could bleed in the dark. The first time sailors laid eyes on a PT boat, many thought the Navy had lost its mind. No steel armor, no towering guns, just 80 feet of laminated mahogany, plywood in a war of steel. It looked more like a racing boat than a warship. Yet hidden inside that fragile hull was a revolution. The design came together in the secrecy of American boatyards, Higgins Industries in New Orleans, Elko in Bayonne, New Jersey, Packard in Detroit, factories that once built pleasure craft and luxury engines, now turned out weapons that would defy tradition. They were called patrol torpedo boats, PT for short. But to the men who built and sailed them, they became the Mosquito Fleet. Small, fast, deadly, able to sting giants in the dark. At the heart of each PT boat were three Packard V-12 engines, aircraft power plants, reforged for the sea, each one roaring with 500 horsepower. Together, they could push a boat across the waves at over 45 knots, faster than most destroyers could even turn their guns. The noise was deafening. The vibration shook through every plank. But when the throttles opened, a PT boat did not move. It leapt. Armament was simple. 4 Mark 13 torpedoes, 21 inches wide, 11 feet long, 2,200 pounds each, a weapon designed for destroyers, now lashed to the deck of a wooden boat. Machine guns lined the sides, twin 50 calibers that spat fire into the night, a single 20mm cannon for extra sting, enough to harass a giant, long enough for torpedoes to finish the job. But firepower was only half the story. The other half was the men. The Navy asked for volunteers, hazardous duty, casualty rates over 50%. 200 stepped forward, 40 were chosen. They were a mix of farm boys, city kids, college graduates, dropouts, men who had fished rivers, built engines, navigated by stars. They came not because the PT boats promised glory, but because they promised action. Training was brutal. At Melville, Rhode Island, men learned to fight like pirates. High-speed torpedo runs in rough seas. Firing solutions calculated by instinct. Engines tuned under pressure of simulated battle. Commander James Wild Jim Patterson drilled one lesson into every crew. The Japanese expect you to fight fair. Don't. They expect you to follow tradition. Don't. They expect you to fear the dark. Make them afraid instead. And slowly, the crews began to understand. A PT boat was not a destroyer. It was an assassin, a guerrilla fighter on water. Strike fast. Disappear faster. hit where the enemy least expected. Each crew became a family. 12 men packed into close quarters, sharing bunks, sharing rations, sharing fear. They learned each other's habits, who snored, who prayed before battle, who laughed too loud. The bonds forged on those wooden decks were stronger than steel. Engineers like Carlos Charlie Mendoza coaxed impossible power from Packards. Mathematicians like Dutch Vanderberg calculated firing angles in seconds. Gunners like Patrick Paddy O'Brien polished each torpedo as if it were gold. Every man mattered. Every skill counted. On larger ships, a sailor might disappear among hundreds. On a PT boat, no one could hide. By the spring of 1943, the boats were ready. The crews trained. The engines tested. The doctrine forged. The Navy, still skeptical, quietly sent them to the South Pacific. Official reports barely mentioned them. Classified as small craft, even to their own side, PT boats were a secret. But secrets have power. The Japanese still believed they owned the night. They did not yet know that wooden ghosts were coming for them. Boats that could slip through shadows. Boats that could strike like thunder and vanish before a destroyer could even turn. The Mosquito Fleet was born. And soon, the Imperial Navy would learn that even an empire could bleed from 1,000 tiny stings. June 30th, 1943, Rendezvous. The forward base was nothing more than a fuel dump, a few huts under palm fronds, and a rough dock clawing into the jungle. The smell hit first. Rotting vegetation, diesel fuel, salt air heavy with decay. This was home for the men of Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9. 12 PT boats, 12 wooden daggers aimed at the heart of the Tokyo Express. Their mission: intercept Japanese reinforcements moving through the Central Solomons. On paper, it sounded simple. Patrol the waters. Sink anything flying the rising sun. In reality, it was chaos. A maze of reefs, jungle-shrouded islands, enemy coast watchers with radios in every village, and destroyer squadrons trained specifically to hunt them down. The first patrol came on July 5th. 3 boats crept into position near Visu. They never got the chance to fire. A Japanese float plane spotted their wakes. Moments later, 4 destroyers thundered down upon them, searchlights blazing. Shells churned the sea. PT-158 took a direct hit. 12 men gone in an instant. The survivors fled through reefs for hours, engines screaming, hearts hammering. By the time they limped back to base, the lesson was burned into memory. They could not fight like destroyers. They could not stand toe-to-toe. They would have to fight like ghosts. The days that followed were restless. Engines were tuned, guns polished, torpedoes checked and rechecked, crews drilled in silence, signaling by flashes of light, cutting engines to drift in the shadows, every tactic born of necessity, every adjustment paid for in blood. Life at the base was raw, spam and powdered eggs for breakfast, coffee black enough to float a wrench, saltwater showers that left skin burning, mosquitoes humming through every night. Mail from home took months to arrive, yet morale held steady, because each man knew he was part of something different, something secret, something dangerous. They slept in shifts, shared bunks, played poker under lanterns that cast long shadows, stories of home mixed with jokes too dark for outsiders. Every man coped in his own way. Some prayed, some laughed louder than the fear inside them. Some grew quiet, staring at the jungle, waiting for orders. The locals became allies. Solomon Islanders, risking execution if caught, paddled out in canoes with scraps of intelligence, enemy positions, convoy movements, hidden anchorages. Without them, the PTs would have been blind. And far away, unseen, Australian coast watchers relayed coded messages through the ether. Eyes and ears in the jungle. ghostly guardians who whispered enemy movements into the night. Every evening the men waited for the signal. Some nights it never came. Others, it came too late. The Japanese convoys slipped through untouched. The frustration was suffocating. They had volunteered for action. Instead, they sat in silence, watching from the shadows, waiting for the chance to prove themselves. Then came the briefing on July 18th. Coast watchers reported a major convoy moving through Blackett Strait. 3 transports, 2 destroyers, elite Japanese reinforcements bound for New Georgia. This was it. The chance they had been waiting for. The squadron leader's words were clear. Gentlemen, this convoy cannot reach its destination. I don't care if you have to ram those transports. They go to the bottom tonight. As the sun bled into the horizon, the crews prepared. Paddy O'Brien ran his hands over the torpedoes, whispering promises to the weapons he treated like children. Charlie Mendoza tuned the Packards until they purred like tigers. Dutch Vanderberg plotted courses again and again, chasing perfection. Every man had his ritual. Every man carried his fear. At 20:30, they slipped lines and headed into the dark. 3 boats, PT-164, PT-168, PT-171, engines muffled, guns tested, torpedoes primed. The sea was rougher than hoped, waves slapping hulls. But it gave cover. By 23, they reached their ambush point. The moon hung low. Shadows stretched across the water. They cut engines, drifted, waited. The men lay still, ears straining, nerves taut. Every creak of wood, every splash of wave, every second dragged. Then, at 23:47, the radio crackled. A coast watcher's voice. 3 large ships. 2 escorts, bearing 280, speed 18 knots, range 15 miles. The hunt was on, and the Mosquito Fleet prepared to bare its teeth. Midnight, July 20th, 1943. The sea lay dark and restless off the north coast of Vella Lavella. 3 PT boats drifted in silence, engines idling, crews waiting, eyes straining into blackness, then shapes on the horizon. At first only shadows against the starfield, then more. Massive silhouettes gliding forward. 2 destroyers in the lead, 3 transports lumbering behind, another destroyer guarding the rear. They moved in perfect formation. Confident, unaware. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Mack McPhersonson whispered the plan. PT-168 would strike from port, PT-171 from starboard, PT-164, his boat, straight up the middle, through the needle's eye, between 2 steel giants. It was madness, but madness was exactly what the Japanese would never expect. All ahead slow, Mack ordered. The boats crept forward, 5 knots, barely moving, letting the convoy come to them. At 2,000 yards, the sailors could hear it, the deep thrumming of diesels, the groan of thousands of tons pushed through black water. At 1,500 yards, details emerged, pagoda bridges, cargo booms, even figures moving on deck. At 1,000 yards, the order came. 3 clicks on the radio. Engines roared from idle to full throttle. PT boats leapt forward, bows lifting, spray exploding around them. 40 knots into the jaws of the enemy. Searchlights blazed. Blinding white cut the night open. The Japanese lookouts reeled in shock. They had expected submarines, maybe destroyers, never this. 3 wooden phantoms charging headlong into their formation. Guns opened. 25-meter tracers raked the sea. Green fire reached like claws. Shells splashed meters from PT-164. But the boats were already inside the formation. Too close for the big guns. Too fast for the search crews to track. Chief Petty Officer Tom Harrigan squeezed the triggers. His twin .50 calibers spat fury. Tracers slashed across the bridge of a destroyer. Glass shattered. Sparks danced. He held the line of fire until barrels glowed red. Fire 1! Fire 2! Paddy O'Brien's torpedoes leapt from their tubes. White wakes carved through black water, 600 yards. too close to miss. The first torpedo slammed beneath the bridge of a transport. The sea erupted in thunder. Flames towered skyward. The second struck midships. Steel cracked. The ship broke its back. Thousands of soldiers spilled screaming into the water. Behind them, PT-168 launched her spread. Both torpedoes struck the second transport. It was loaded with ammunition. The blast turned night into day. A rolling fireball climbed high, raining molten steel and burning bodies across the sea. The shockwave knocked men flat on deck. Fires licked the wooden hull of PT-168, stomped out with boots and bare hands. Chaos consumed the convoy. Destroyers wheeled desperately. Searchlights crossed. Guns fired wildly, but they faced an impossible choice: fire and risk hitting their own, or hold fire and watch transports die. One destroyer turned hard toward PT-164. Its bow sliced water like a knife. 10 seconds to impact. Mac shoved throttles past their stops. The Packard screamed. The PT pivoted in a desperate arc. 10 feet. That was the margin. 10 feet between survival and annihilation. As they passed, Harrigan emptied another belt into the enemy bridge. Sparks showered steel. Men ducked for cover. PT-171 was less lucky. Joey Antonelli lined up on the third transport. A searchlight pinned him. Tracers stitched across his bow. Holes ripped through wood. One shell hit a torpedo. Miraculously, it did not detonate. But Joey was forced to break off, his boat trailing smoke. Mac gave the order. "Launch the rest and get us out." 2 more torpedoes thundered into the water. The last transport turned, combing the wakes, both fish sliding harmlessly past. The convoy fought back now, every gun barking, the sea torn with splashes. 5-inch shells howled overhead. One hit would turn any PT into kindling. The Mosquito Boats fled, 3 engines screaming, zigzagging through curtains of fire, waves exploding in phosphorescent spray. Behind them, the sea burned. 2 transports sinking. Thousands of soldiers drowning. Explosions lighting the strait like fireworks of hell. PT-168, battered but alive, circled once more. She put 1 more torpedo into the already dying second transport. Secondary explosions ripped her apart. Ammunition cooked off. Fire rolled skyward. The sea glowed orange. By dawn, the outcome was clear. 2 transports gone. 6,000 soldiers lost. The third turned back. Japanese reinforcements denied. The Mosquito Fleet had stung, and stung deep, but the price was real. PT-171 limped away, riddled with holes. Men wounded, engines failing. PT-168 scarred with shrapnel, antenna gone, crew shaken. PT-164 scorched, barrels burned, decks charred. Still, all 3 survived. When they regrouped, battered and bleeding, the truth hit them. 3 wooden boats had stopped an entire convoy. 3 wooden boats had shattered Japan's faith in the night. From that moment, the darkness of the Solomon Sea no longer belonged to the rising sun. It belonged to the shadows. And in those shadows, the PT boats reigned. Dawn crept over the Solomon Sea. The glow of fire still lingered on the horizon. 2 Japanese transports were gone. 6,000 men swallowed by black water. The third turned back, the convoy broken. For the men of PT-164, PT-168, and PT-171, survival was victory enough. Their decks were scarred, their barrels scorched, their nerves stretched to breaking. But they were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. The journey home was agony. Engines throttled low to evade Japanese floatplanes that scoured the skies at first light. Boats camouflaged under palm fronds along hidden coves. Crewmen whispered instead of spoke, straining to hear the distant drone of enemy aircraft. Hours dragged. 3 hours stretched into 14 before they reached Rendova. exhausted, hungry, victorious. Debriefing was immediate. Intelligence officers demanded every detail: enemy formations, gun calibers, response times. Every scrap of memory became data for the Navy. What these crews reported would shape the tactics of every PT squadron that followed. Radio intercepts told another story. Japanese communications described new American secret weapons, high-speed torpedo boats, appearing from nowhere, vanishing into the dark. The Imperial Navy, once master of night combat, was now unsure. The shadows no longer belonged to them. The strategic impact was swift. Convoys grew larger, but slower. Destroyer escorts doubled, then tripled. Searchlight-equipped float planes circled above night routes. Every adjustment meant fewer reinforcements reaching garrisons. Every hesitation meant American troops ashore could breathe easier. Psychological effects cut deeper still. Japanese soldiers waiting on island beaches watched the horizon for ships that never came. Hunger replaced confidence. Isolation replaced reinforcement. Offensives were canceled. Morale faltered. The myth of invincibility, shattered by 3 boats of plywood and courage. But the cost was real. Within weeks, PT-166 hit a mine. All hands lost. PT-162 was caught dead in the water by Japanese destroyers, blown apart in daylight. Joey Antonelli of PT-171, killed by a sniper at a forward base. By October, 7 boats of the squadron were gone. 73 men never returned. Yet the exchange rate was brutal in America's favor. For every boat lost, enemy convoys bled. Destroyers, transports, barges, thousands of troops who would never reach the battlefield. Every torpedo fired was measured not just in steel destroyed, but in American lives spared on the beaches and jungles of the Solomons. The survivors carried scars invisible as well as visible. Nightmares of burning ships, the screams of drowning men, the memory of staring into searchlights, knowing death was a trigger pull away. Some men cracked. Some withdrew into silence. Others laughed louder, drank harder, anything to push the darkness back. But all knew they had changed the war. When news of the battle spread through the fleet, whispers followed. Stories of Mosquito Boats sinking giants, of plywood craft humiliating the rising sun. Official communiques were careful. PT boats remained classified, but sailors talked. And in their stories, the Mosquito Fleet became legend. The Japanese would never again own the night so completely. Every supply run now carried fear with its cargo. Every shadow on the horizon might hide the sting of a torpedo. The aftermath of Blackett Strait was not just tactical. It was psychological. It was strategic. It was proof that innovation and audacity could turn weakness into strength. Proof that even in the darkest waters, courage could shine brighter than steel. And as the sun rose over the Solomons that July morning, the men of Squadron 9 knew. They had not just survived a night of fire. They had altered the balance of the Pacific War. The war moved on. Battles grew larger. Names like Leyte Gulf and Okinawa filled the headlines. And yet, in the shadows of history, the Mosquito Fleet left a mark no bomb or battleship could erase. For Japan, the fear never faded. Officers who once bragged of night-fighting supremacy admitted after the war that PT boats were their nightmare. Submarines could be hunted. Aircraft could be seen coming. But these wooden phantoms, striking from nowhere, vanishing without trace, made darkness itself an enemy. That fear rippled outward. Every convoy slowed, every reinforcement delayed, every plan rewritten. Thousands of Japanese troops starved on islands because supplies never arrived. Not from bombers, not from submarines, but from wooden boats built in secret American boatyards. The legacy reached beyond the Pacific. Doctrine shifted. Navies around the world studied the PT campaign. Speed, surprise, asymmetry. These became the principles of modern small craft warfare. From missile boats of the Cold War to fast attack craft of today, every design carries DNA from those plywood raiders. The men themselves carried the memory for life. Dutch Vanderburg returned to Yale, mapping ocean currents with the precision he once used to dodge destroyers. Charlie Mendoza built racing engines in Los Angeles, his garage a shrine to speed. Patty O'Brien stayed in the Navy, writing the manual for torpedo maintenance still used decades later. Each man a thread in a tapestry woven by courage and invention. To them, the boats were never just machines. They were lifelines, coffins, homes, legends. They proved that 12 men in plywood could alter the course of a world war. And to America, the PT boats carried a deeper lesson. That strength does not always mean size. That courage is not measured in armor. That innovation, seized in moments of desperation, can bend history. When the last PT boat was retired in 1959, replaced by steel and missile and radar, the story could have ended. But it did not. Because the spirit of the Mosquito Fleet lived on. Every fast craft slipping through the night, every raider striking where the enemy feels safest, every daring gamble on the battlefield of seas, all carry the echo of July 1943. 3 wooden boats against an empire. 3 wooden boats that proved imagination could defeat tradition. 3 wooden boats that made the rising sun fear its own shadows. That is the legacy of the PT boats. Not just ships sunk, not just convoys stopped, but the reminder that even in the darkest nights, free men in fragile vessels can change the tide of history.